We're here once again right outside of Las Vegas at the all-new Kia EV6 GT launch. And sadly, Mark will not be joining us for this video as he's currently getting leg extensions in the hope to play for the Chicago Bulls as a bench player. In this video, you get a unique opportunity to hear directly from Kia, from a product planner who has a fairly in-depth knowledge base on this product. So we'll be giving you a deep dive on the technical side of what makes the EV GT different than its lesser siblings. I'll be taking this for both a track, strangely enough, and street drive, and giving you a brief overview of the product as a whole. So please enjoy the video. So what is the EV6 GT? Well, this is their most powerful EV that Kia currently sells here in North America. It is good for a total output of 577 horsepower from its two electric motors. The front motor puts out 160 kilowatts, the rear motor puts out 270, and according to Kia's marketing team, this means it's good for 0 to 60 in the low threes, which is quite impressive, to be fair, for a low $60,000 product. This means with a 0 to 60 time in the low threes, it's faster than a Hurican Evo Spider, which according to Kia means you should buy this instead of that V10 Lamborghini, because clearly a lot of people cross-shop these two products. What about from a technical perspective? What did they do to the EV6 other than add some powerful electric motors? Well, this is still on eGMP or eGIMP, that is Kia's electric architecture that they share with Hyundai, which means this is on the same platform as the Hyundai Ioniq 5. This has a total battery size of 77.4 kilowatt hours, which means it has a total range with this system output in the low 200-mile mark. It's like 209, 203, which is not very far, but they are balancing that with a 800-volt architecture compared to many of its competitors that are running a 400-volt architecture, which means this should be able to charge much faster. On a 350 kilowatt charger or a fast charger, this can do 10 to 80% in the 18-19 minute mark. And if you are on a far more common 150 kilowatt charger, you're looking at in the low 20s, which is, to be honest, quite fast. So from a suspension perspective, they also altered this platform. While it still has a weight bias of 4951, the front suspension geometry has been altered. They added an additional link to the front McPherson strut suspension. The spring rates in the front are now softer by 8 or 9%. The rear spring rates are up by 11%, and it has a 15% stiffer rear sway bar, which is supposed to make this feel a little bit more nimble, a little bit less likely to understeer. This vehicle also has a series of drive modes that change system output. It'll reduce the system output in Eco and Normal. When you're in GT mode, you get the full beans. However, once you reach a lower state of charge, it starts to taper out the total system output. The drive modes also change things like regen braking and the dampers themselves, which are entirely active. This car also has drift mode, which will take this architecture, which is rear-wheel drive, and send all of the power to the rear, where you can slide this thing to your heart's content. And it's not a gimmick, like something like a Focus RS. It really will slide around like a Hellcat, which is hilarious. It also has a electronic simulated E-diff in the rear. So it's not clutch-based, but the rear motors essentially act like a limited slip differential, and they do their job. The brakes are bigger than they used to be because you now have 21-inch wheels. While I think the calipers are essentially the same, the rotors have grown in size, and the steering has been revised to be a little bit more aggressive. But with all of that said, let's talk to the Kia gentleman who's going to elaborate on some of my technical information.
Hey, my name is Joseph Choi. I'm the product manager for the EV6, which includes the GT program that we're here to experience today. The EV6 GT is really just a statement of what it is that this organization, when it sets its mind to something, it's able to achieve. So we have a lot of talented individuals throughout design, R&D, through engineering, and then a lot of really great leaders throughout our organizations. Depending on the drive mode, you're going to get different amount of power and applied to different wheels proportionally. So For example, in eco mode, you start out with 214 kilowatts. It's basically a rear-wheel drive car, but when there's a hard acceleration requirement, etc., it can apply more of the torque to the front wheels, up to 50%. When you get to the sport level is when 20% can go to the front, 80% to the back, or up to 50-50. Of course, it's all depending on the variables of speed and acceleration. And finally, when you get to the GT, it's still 20-80 and up to 50-50, but it's going to spend more of its time at 50-50 front and rear. So the battery itself, it's the same 77.4 kilowatt hour battery as what you'll see in the Wind or in the GT line, but there's different logic that's applied so that the computer is able to manage the temperature differently. Also, in the motor itself, the rotors are spinning faster. So standard model goes from up to 15,000 RPMs. This one can go up to 21,000 RPMs. So of course that means this higher temperature. So there's a slightly revised oil cooling execution that is able to manage those higher temperatures. So yeah, so we can't go into necessarily the design of it, but it has been updated to be able to handle the higher performance.
So with that out of the way, let's talk about the interior and exterior. And honestly, there's not a lot to talk about because it's essentially the same as the regular EV6, which we have covered ad nauseum at this point. You get different seats, which are essentially lifted out of something like an Elantra N. They're more aggressive. You get some different interior trim. You have a fancy steering wheel that has the GT button on it. Other than that, it's essentially the same space. It's still a electric SAV CUV where the rear seats fold down. You have a ton of legroom, a decent amount of headroom. And thankfully, the electronics in this car are not gimmicky. They're very easy to use. In many ways, they're better than most of its competition. From an exterior perspective, other than the bigger wheels and the neon yellow calipers, it's essentially the same vehicle. You get some different badges on it and slightly altered front and rear fascias. But with that, I think it's time for us to take this for a quick drive, both on the street and on the track. Ready for a street drive, and this gentleman next to me is not Mark. You can tell by his hairline. You want to introduce yourself, sir?
Yeah, I'm Brett Evans with Motor1.com, and we're going to have a great time driving the EV6 GT.
Look, I know you're a potential Ferrari owner, and I know you saw the 0-60 time in this thing. Well, man, I need a Kia instead, so let's demonstrate that. Well, let's try to at least.
Oh, there we go.
So 0-60 in the mid-3s, which is blisteringly fast, and I have fake engine noise maxed out in this thing. And as you talked about in your review, and you talked about yourself, the thing you're going to notice in this car, at least on the street, other than all my stuff sliding around in the back seat, is the mass of this thing. It feels like it weighs 4,500 pounds, because it does. You can't hide that. I mean, you've driven a lot of other products in your own job, and again, thank you for filling in for Mark. How does this feel compared to like a Mach E GT or hell, even a Taycan?
Well, there's no denying that those are avowedly performance-oriented products. Taycan especially, like that feels like a proper Porsche. One of my former colleague, Clint Simoni, who's at Edmunds.com now, he always said that the Taycan was the car that got him excited for an EV future. Like until then, all EVs were kind of just like appliances. So they're really kind of like pushing really hard and comparing this thing nominally at least to a Taycan GTS. And I think
this is $60,000-ish.
Yeah, and a Taycan GTS is double that. So, they really kind of are trying to do this whole value play with, you get all the performance of a Taycan at a much, much, much lower price. And that's totally fair for people who are concerned with straight line speed, like you're about to demonstrate. Yeah.
Yeah, and from 0-60, I agree with their marketing. This is, the
thrill.
The joy of EVs is what really interests people is that actual acceleration number on that top speed. But the finer details of what Kia has struggled with, or Hyundai, is driving dynamics, and I can tell you, this does not drive as well as a Taycan. I'm going to be honest with you.
Oh, for sure.
But you're right, it is half the value, half the money. And if you're coming from something like a Stinger or an internal combustion Kia, I think obviously you'll appreciate the access to performance at this price point in the mid-60s. And then when you take it out of GT mode and you drive this like a good boy or girl, it is a GT car, right? It is the only thing you hear is a little bit of wind noise, a little bit of tire noise, and it's a totally quiet, serene experience. What do you think about the ride quality? And I know I talked about the seats earlier, they're not for everybody, but what do you think about the ride quality? They claim, and they did, change dampening, wheels, some of the suspension components. Do you think it's offensive to a regular person?
Absolutely not. No, definitely not offensive. I think this is we had some good freeway time on our drive to Valley of Fire, and like Las Vegas freeways are expansion joints and concrete and kind of terrible, and this thing does a great job over some of those kind of nastier, higher frequency, like buzzy noises. And so I think they've done a great job of managing, trying to get this thing to drive nicely while also
being 5%, or not, I hate to say 5% fun, but being a little bit of fun.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, they've done a great job with making sure that it doesn't punish you in exchange for being a, nominal performance car.
Yeah, I think what e-GIMP, as Mark and I like to call it, this platform does a good job of, is absorbing NVH and harshness and all that other fun stuff.
Yeah.
I think if you're actually going to buy one of these cars, you're going to balance your decrease of range compared to one of the more, let's call it, less powerful variants. Those cars can get almost 300 miles of range.
Yeah.
This is eking out barely above 200, so you're banking on that 800 volt architecture to allow you to charge this thing relatively quickly. They claim on a 350 kilowatt charger 10 to 80% in like 18 minutes, and a more realistic 150 kilowatt hour charger in the low 20s.
Yeah, they said 21 minutes on a 150 or 18 minutes on a 350. So you really are getting a whole lot of charge speed, which is probably this car's greatest triumph over the likes of like the Mustang Mach E GT. You really get really quick public charging times with still, getting 200 and change out of a full battery.
Yeah, so I think with that, I do appreciate you spending some time with me, sir. We're going to head to the track and see what a 4,500 and change pound SAV sports activity vehicle can accomplish. All right, let's do it. So I'm out here at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, and we're going to do a couple hot laps in EV6 GT, which is about the most irrelevant measure of this car you could possibly imagine, but I am thankful to be on a racetrack, to say the least. I'm chasing Matt, who is a pro driver, who's about 10 times the driver I am. The first thing I'm going to tell you out here on track is this feels like a big, heavy car that has a lot of power. You never, ever... You never ever forget the mass. It is surprisingly well suited for an SAV or CUV EV product out here, but you can definitely hang the ass out on this car, which is very, very entertaining. It's super fast, and I will say, being out being out here on track, it's weird in an EV because normally in a internal combustion car you would be used to hearing more than just tire noise, but that's all you feel and hear in this car, and you're met by a very, very large acceleration number. This is brake by wire, as you can probably imagine. There is regen, but the pedal doesn't translate a whole lot of feel to you, which is a little disconcerting when you are carrying the speeds that you do.
All right, we're going to need max brake before the triple cone. So right there in the ABS.
It is a little bit disconcerting to see how much speed you can carry in a car this heavy and devoid of, let's call it, traditional sports car feel. It is predictable to slide around though. As we talked about off camera, or as we talked about on camera with the engineer, in GT mode like I am right now, it'll go 50-50, though it favors 20-80. So when it needs to send power to the front, it will, but it does definitely favor the rear wheels, as you can probably see by my endless sideways. I'm gonna be honest, again, as I said in the beginning of this drive, being on track in an EV6 GT is largely an irrelevant measure of performance for a car like this. But at the same time, it is very, very funny. Fucking monkey I am. Final thoughts on the Kia EV6 GT. If you are coming at this product as an enthusiast, because this is how it's marketed, and you are a E39 M5 or Porsche Cayenne or more driver's SUV sports sedan customer, parts of this vehicle are going to drive you absolutely nuts, particularly the total absence of any sort of driver communication. The steering, the brake-by-wire system, the chassis don't offer a whole lot in communication. That said, this vehicle is still very, very entertaining to drive. So if you're looking at it from a more traditional car enthusiast perspective, some of this is going to be very disappointing. But we live in a different world, and this is sadly, or fortunately, depending on who you are, a true dedicated EV. In the cosmic sense of fun, what the EV6 GT offers, particularly on a back road or track, is sideways hilarity. I joked with Jacob from the Straight Pipes that this car makes you laugh like a little kid. While it does feel like you're driving a simulator and that if you have a accident you can basically just hit the respawn button, it really does do the sideways thing in a way that very few cars I've ever driven offer. But enough about that, because the reality is very few people are ever going to drift their Kia SUV SAV. What about this car as a EV competitor? Well, it's quite good, honestly. While, yes, $61,000 is a lot of money compared to many of its performance rivals, it does the EV things better. I prefer it to the Mach E GT. Its dynamics are quite good. It's very quiet. The electronics inside the car work well. The seats are unique looking. The car is, while polarizing from an exterior perspective, it's interesting looking, and it has an 800-volt architecture, and that's the big one. So with that, thanks for watching. Hope to see you soon.